Welcome to the funeral of the 20th century warfare. While the world watches the Middle East through the lens of a regional conflict, Putin is using the sands of Iran as a laboratory for the end of America's superpower. We are witnessing a kinetic chessboard where billion-dollar aircrafts and elite stealth jets, the old guard of heavy metal, are being dismantled by new modernized guerrilla of the skies. This isn't just Iran's fight, it is Putin's masterclass in asymmetric attrition, proving that in 2026, a swarm of $20 drones can bleed $1 trillion military dry. Tonight, we look at the three pillars of why the old way of war is dead. And with me here tonight is Mustafa Jinadu. My name is Stella Falabi. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, yeah. So this is the new warfare, which relies on electronic jamming, signals and stuff like that. Layered attacks in which you use drones and cheaper missiles to destroy interceptors, and then to finally destroy, in the case of America, $1 billion, maybe even $1 trillion weapons systems very cheaply, so that it's a 1 to 100 cost, which means for every piece of material that Russia loses or Israel or Iran loses, the U.S. is losing 100 times more budget-wise in weaponry. And then there's also it's a form of guerrilla missile warfare uh, in Ukraine as well as in Iran now. We're seeing the model that Putin has engineered, or that the Russians have engineered, in which we use trucks and movable launch pads to put missiles rather than keeping them in one area, so that it's guerrilla. And also, there's no centralized place in Iran or in Russia. There's no centralized unit that gives signals for missiles to go. These are all like sleeper cells. They're all independent and they act, and they've been given a script long before, so that they don't have to go to a major commander to say, let's do this and that. So that by killing their commanders or by killing central areas, you can't stop the warfare. And you're seeing that in Iran. Iran is now has they have thousands of sleeper cells, areas with missiles, and nobody knows where it's going to come. You can't spy because there's no central area and there's no communication through radio or anything. Now, this is going to be very difficult to beat them. Now, on the other hand, the U.S., which is the old style of warfare, $13 billion ships. They have two ships, 13 billion. One of them just had to retreat because Iran hit it or tried to hit it and could sink it. It had to move out 1,000 kilometers away from the land. 13 trillion dollar carrier. Then they have bases, all these heavy stockpile bases in the Middle East, which are being destroyed, which sit down there. Did you hear about this, Afalabi? A day or two ago, Iran just destroyed a $1 billion
Yeah, I
satellite
heard about
system,
it. I heard
a
about it.
1 billion with $20,000 drones and missiles. So what they're doing is economic warfare, because they're bleeding America's economy. And once these weapons run out, there's no way that they can restock. And literally, I've said this before, and I'll say it again: they've been driven out of the Middle East. This form was built up in Russia, and I think Putin wanted to test it out here, and it's working very well. The only weakness to this type of warfare system is that it can't really defend from air superiority. But even that is going to be tested, because Iran doesn't have a dome. They don't have an iron dome, but they don't need one necessarily against the U.S., because the U.S. will run out of bombs and everything. And once the U.S. is decapitated from this war, Israel's going to be decapitated because they can't restock it. So what it is that they don't have a air defense system, but what they're doing is that they will destroy all of Israel's missiles and America's interceptors first, so that there'll be nothing to strike them. So that's their defense system. But it is one in which you take a lot of heavy hits. But there's another aspect to this war, which is the electronic warfare, in which they're jamming signals and stuff, which is why a lot of America's uh, devices or drones or things that hover and look for places to destroy more sophisticated, cheaper types of weapons have been already cloned. HIMARS systems have been cloned in Russia, and the Iranians have made clones of those things so that they can jam them. So basically, the Iranians know the frequency of the American systems of their drones and more sophisticated, cheaper weapons that can disrupt. The disruptive weapons are being jammed by the Iranians. And as time goes by, as this war goes by, and as the years go by, they'll get better at that. So basically, the U.S. sacrificed its weaponry code by attacking, giving it to Ukraine. Russia take those things, learn how they work, and defend them. So overall, this is just an expensive war for the U.S., and it's showing that the U.S. hegemony is over, because U.S. hegemony depends on bombers ships and things because they're not connected by land to Europe or to Asia. So they can't fight anymore unless they can't attack countries like Iran or Russia anymore unless Ukraine is strong. Ukraine is not strong, or unless Israel is strong. Israel and Saudi Arabia and Dubai and all these areas, they need bases to fight. So it's over. And this is not bad because it doesn't mean the U.S. day is over. It just means the U.S. days of traveling 10,000 miles to destroy another country is over. It's too expensive. You'll get everything blown out of the sky. And on top of that, your allies in Europe and in Israel would just be pummeled by missiles. So this is basically Russia and Iran have just made Western warfare obsolete. So which is not a problem because they're not the type of warfare that Russia and Iran are doing is not a war of conquest. It's just to defend your territory. What are your thoughts, Afolabi?
Yeah, absolutely. The warfare is to defend their territory, and it's a very formidable one. It's like the analogy of the sledgehammer and the needle. Basically, it's an asymmetric, brutally effective mathematics of layered attack. The first layer basically is like what Iran did. They initiate the attack with waves of cheap $20,000 lawnmower engine Shahed drones. And then the primary goal isn't necessarily to destroy, but to force the US to light up its radar positions and empty all their magazines, firing off interceptors, that cost between $2 million and $4 million a piece. And then the second layer is the main surgical strike. Once the interceptors are depleted or reloading, high-speed munition slip through and a devastating effect. You mentioned what happened February 28th when the $1.1 billion early warning radar was destroyed. So this is a very effective kind of warfare where it appears that one country wants to, with brazen effect, wants to show a technological superiority, while the other looks at it and basically approaches it in a different way. So the sledgehammer is not really as effective as it should be because they are making the US to deplete their high-cost weaponry. And what they're basically doing is that as those ones are being depleted, the very formidable munitions that belong to the Iran are slipping through to devastating effect. And also, we
Yeah.
can see how they have regionalized a war that was supposed to be like a one-on-one fight in a boxing ring. They've regionalized it and basically spread U.S. Tentacles, making them weak and ineffective.
Yeah, and let's look again. So this three-pronged style of war and how it's also part of a loop of a feedback loop, which is giving Russia more information on how the stuff that they use to work against Ukraine over there will work in the Middle East, which means that eventually Russia knows they're going to have to jump in too. So here's what it is. The first thing is that, like, let's look at this tactic. Shahid first. Iran puts their $20,000 to $50,000 missiles to saturate radar and force defenders to deplete their expensive interceptor stockpiles. $2 to $4 million Patriot or Arrow missiles. The U.S. is still using Patriot missiles, which go back to the late '90s. That's all I have to say. Once this shield is busy or exhausted, they follow up with their hypersonic missiles, like the Fateh, to hit high value targets. This turns a technological advantage, the interceptor, into an economic
Yeah,
liability because those
absolutely.
interceptors, they're a waste of money. And if you don't shoot down the first cheap metal things that come, the interceptors are going to be gone anyway. So they need to think twice about this interceptor strategy. Then they use hypersonic and modernized guerrilla tactics. Unlike the U.S. and Israeli reliance on massive fixed point carrier groups and air bases, the Russian Iranian model uses mobile truck mounted launchers that can fire and disappear before you can reposition. So basically, if you have a missile launch site and you're putting missiles out, once the satellites pick out where that missile is coming from, they can destroy it. But by the time they turn around to go, it's gone. And I've seen images. Sometimes it's not even a truck. Iran has cities underground, and they have things. The ground will open up, and a missile will come out. Then the ground will close, and then it'll move to another area. They've spent. This is what people don't realize. Khamenei was not just a religious leader. He spent 20 to 30 years overseeing the construction of this military system in conjunction with Russia and also in conjunction with Iranian scientists. So while because the U.S. has been telegraphing for decades that they want to destroy Iran. Okay, now the hypersonic testing reportedly used operational learning. The hypersonic missiles, along with the drones, what's been happening is Iran has been giving Russia technology for drones, and Russia's been giving them technology for hypersonic missiles. And Russia's watching how these hypersonic missiles are working in the Middle East because that's a different terrain from Ukraine. And they're taking data, just like in car racing, where you take data to figure out more things about Middle East war. And you have to ask your question: if Russia's not using this data for its war in Europe and is using it for the Middle East, what is that saying, Afalabi? It means that either they're going to improve the strategy for Iran in fighting in the Middle East, or they're going to jump in either through sending troops there or through helping build armies with groups like Hezbollah and in Syria and Lebanon to basically give them the data because Russia has the data, they have the data analysis. Iran doesn't have the data analysis, which means that by the time this war starts again in a couple of years, which it will, Iran will even be more devastating because they will learn from the data from what's going on in consultation with the Russians. Because I don't believe Russia is going to send troops to Middle East. So if they want to know how if they're using this data not to improve their army, but to figure out how to improve what's going on in the Middle East, it means that they're in it for the long run with Iran. What do you think?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the way Russia is handling this, they're working like an electronic ghost. Basically,
Yeah.
it's a secret source of, support they're giving Iran. We're more or less witnessing an active, like a two-way technological correspondence between Moscow and Tehran. Iran provides the massive manufacturing scale, while the brain and the brawn comes from Russia. They are delivering S-400 components and M-jamming ports to Iran. Russia has effectively exported the same electronic warfare tactics that was so successful with GPS-guided bombs in Europe. So basically, US smart weapons are being actively spoofed or diverted in the Persian Gulf because they can reach their targets. This electronic boost neutralizes the US advantage in precision strikes. So Russia and Tehran are working in tandem, but you can't see the fingerprints of Russia. And this is making the Iran war really very good for them, very effective, I say, and strategic.
Yeah, and they're jamming F-35 jets from the U.S. And here's the scariest thing: by studying this stuff and through electric, they're making their own weapons unjammable, which means that on the modern day warfare, U.S. has no data and no jamming systems to deal with Iran when this war goes global. Okay. Now the last part, we're looking at the attrition. The U.S. is using $2 million to $4 million interceptors to stop $20,000 drones. The, this is why the U.S.'s deficit is 34 trillion. So what we're looking at is through this hybrid war, Russia and Iran are ensuring that the U.S. empire falls due to economic collapse, and we're seeing the signs of it. Raids in Minnesota, citizens getting killed, talks of civil wars and things. Okay, the U.S. has expended 25% of its global THAAD munitions, which means they're losing the ability to fight China and to continue the Ukraine war because they're destroying all their interceptors, just trying to take down Iran. Iran has become a very expensive albatross for America. Could you imagine a whole empire being taken down to its knees just because it wanted to spend trillions of dollars to overthrow the leader of a country that it can't overthrow the regime? I mean, even if it did, is it really worth it? That's what I'll end with. This is a tragic war that Trump has brought in for America because it's absolutely going to ruin the economy and it's also ruined the weapon system so that their wars against China and other countries can't go. But I think that's a blessing in disguise because we don't need such wars. What are your thoughts, Afalabi?
Yeah, I think it's because Iran know that in a conventional war, they cannot defeat the US. So what they have
Yeah,
done is this strategy is to make the war so expensive and so chaotic that even US eventually decides it's not worth continuing. And at the
nah,
same time, outside pressure helps Iran government to unite its population. So it's a very formidable tactic. And then Iran and its allies can target oil infrastructure in the Gulf countries. Groups like Houthi movement, have already shown that drone or missile attacks can damage oil facilities. Because the Gulf
yeah,
economies depend heavily on oil. Even small
yeah,
attacks can have huge economic effects on them. So this is a
yeah.
very formidable way of waging this war. They just want to run America down financially and then target Gulf economies, basically.
It'll be good for America too because now they'll say we can't afford war, so we need to buy prostitutes and ice cream. Good old fashioned daddy. What did you bring me? Oh, dad, I brought you ice cream. I didn't bring you the head of the Shah. Well, you can have ice cream and pornography for today. That's cheap. A pornography magazine costs costs $10. A THAAD missile costs 50 billion, right? All right. So this is actually good news for America too, because we can get all this bullshit about fighting out of our head, and now we
No,
can face our
absolutely.
economy. But you know what? The
Absolutely.
next thing is they're going to start attacking Cuba and small countries in the Western Hemisphere to feel better about themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Take us out of Falavi.
It's been another brilliant show. I've been discussing how a smaller nation with an attritional tactic can make the super heavyweight look very ordinary. And
Through
for
the help
myself
of
and
Putin, though.
Mustafa,
This is Putin's war. Yeah.
yeah, and for myself and Mustafa, we'll be back again.
Bloody